One of the rules in TQM is that any worker can shut down the assembly line. Everybody's given respect. So it's really a strategic and systematic approach to harmonizing the interests of all your employees, your customers, your supply chain, your suppliers, your distribution partners, and your shareholders toward a common, this is what our company stands for. This is our purpose. These are our goals. These are objectives. And then you have a process of continuous improvement where everybody has an incentive and is inspired to help you continually improve. So you never need change management. You build change management into your culture. It's really TQM for people.
Understand where to put pressure. If things are going really, really well, put pressure on it. Keep doing it. If things are not going really, really well, fail fast, put pressure on it so it breaks. But that's the whole idea of marketing, is really understanding where to put pressure and what's working.
Unfinished Business Podcast Show with your host, David Sliman.
Welcome back to the show, everybody. Today's an interesting topic, and I like to personally call it organizational alignment. And really one of the most important components of running a successful organization is that alignment between those who are in charge and those leading the charge. And our guest today likes to call it human capital management. We're going to dive into that a little bit as we go on here. But how do organizations and professionals in these organizations have a symbiotic relationship so that the companies and people personally and professionally are growing in an environment? It's not easy. We're going to talk about culture. We're going to talk about leadership, and we're going to talk about building healthy organizations today. And I have the expert on. He's got a few books, one of which is Enterprise Engagement Roadmap, and one is Enterprise Engagement for CEOs. And I'm going to ask some questions around that. And we're also going to jump into some sales development. Our guest likes the permission-based marketing and sales process. We're really trying to help your prospect. We're really aligned on that. So we're going to dig into that. So without further ado, Bruce Bolger, welcome to the show. Appreciate you being here.
Great, and thanks to be with you, David.
Yeah, I'm really looking forward to this. So listen, you started as a journalist, okay? And in my research, it seems like you knew very early in your career that there was this disconnect in business leadership. And I want you to give our guests and our listeners a little bit of idea or background, but more importantly, why you're leading that, or why you've led that charge for so many years and really doing such a great job on it.
Well, thank you. Actually, it was my first job out of college. I was an assistant editor for a trade magazine for a trade association in plastics. Remember that movie, Go Into Plastics? Well, I went into plastics for just a little bit. Yeah. And the CEO at the time was a former Marine, and I'm sure he served our country nobly. But the culture that he developed in that company was completely inappropriate to the people who worked there. They were not Marines. They were regular, administrative to white collar people. And he ran the type of organization that would have made any young person coming out of school. And I had been living in France for a year. So to come out of that to living in that culture and seeing all the unhappy people, everybody miserable on Sunday night, all the grumbling, all the wasted time. It was my first job that made me realize this is stupid. This is wasteful. And then, of course, being a business journalist and talking to all these different companies, you realize this was the norm.
Yeah, it's really interesting because running an organization at any point, whether it's back then or today, things move fast, especially if you're running with a growing organization. And professionals, listen, as human beings, we're wired that a lot of human beings don't like change. But if you're going to be in an organization that's growing, there's going to be natural change, or it's going to die in the vine. So how do organizations and professionals best bridge that gap?
It's really funny. In manufacturing in the last century, when I was a very young guy in journalism, I was covering the concept of total quality management. And what that is, it's a strategic and systematic approach to building quality into everything that you do by aligning and harmonizing the interests of all your stakeholders and on the assembly line, and giving them a stake in success, giving them
Hmm.
a feeling of ownership. One of the rules in TQM is that any worker can shut down the assembly line. Everybody's given respect. So it's really a strategic and systematic approach to harmonizing the interests of all your employees, your customers, your supply chain, your suppliers, your distribution partners, and your shareholders toward a common, this is what our company stands for. This is our purpose. These are our goals. These are objectives. And then you have a process of continuous improvement where everybody has an incentive and is inspired to help you continually improve. So you never need change management. You build change management into your culture. It's really TQM for people.
Yeah, and I got to tell you, it's a tough thing because especially the bigger your organization gets, right? You have a CEO who has a vision or an idea or a roadmap or an idea of how they want the organization to look. And the bigger the organization, the more that gets diluted down the line again to the people who are leading the charge. How do you eliminate that? I mean, if you could give some strategies and ideas, how do you keep that conceptual idea of, the leadership of what they want to accomplish as an organization, leading that motivation or that concept all the way down to, the people who are leading on the front lines?
Well, it really does start with the CEO and where he or she believes value is created. A lot of business schools don't teach CEOs or up and coming CEOs or entrepreneurs about people management. It might be very quick little, warm and fuzzies and culture. Well, research shows, and research validated by J.P. Morgan's quantum analytics group, research has actually proven that if you manage your organization in the way that I'm pretty much explaining, there's what's called a human capital factor, and this was developed by
Okay.
an analytics group called Irrational Capital, which
Okay.
shows that companies that have a very high level of alignment and support, where people really feel appreciated, they outperform their competitors, they outperform the benchmarks on the stock market. And there are now multiple studies, independent studies, that validate something that you and I would think is pretty logical, that, hey, if everybody in your organization is fired up, they believe in your purpose, goals, and objectives, they see how their job and what they do, even if they're a janitor, rolls up to that purpose, goals, and objectives, your company will get that incremental effort, that willingness to give, that willingness to watch the back of the CEO. And frankly, anybody who follows athletics, sports,
Yeah.
or history, would have to agree that when a team, really what happened. I'm not a sports person. I shouldn't talk about what happened yesterday with Ohio State, but wasn't it the spirit of that team that really
Yes.
fostered that enormous comeback?
Yeah.
Or that so anyway, it was Notre Dame. Maybe they could have won anyway. But what I
Yes.
read and heard was that the spirit of that locker room. So I think, David, when companies begin to see how much money they are wasting on disengagement, and by the way, the latest figures that just come out, not only is
Yes.
from Gallup disengagement the highest it's ever been, but the Edelman Trust survey, which to me I have always thought panders a little bit to the corporate world and says how great they are. Well, guess what? It finds that there is so much anger right now at businesses that there's threats of violence.
Mm.
So it's pretty scary that right now, when businesses are talking about return to work, cracking down, getting tough, they're not looking at the research that shows that people are angry, and when they're angry, they don't work hard.
What are they angry about? I want to hear this because is it the compensation? Is it the having to come back to the office? Is it the what are the things that are driving this anger? I'd love to hear this.
Well, Gallup, I mean, I can't, speak for anything. I'm going to
Okay.
just share the
Yeah,
research.
and
The
you're
Edelman,
yes.
I think it really boils down to a lack of trust.
Okay.
A lack of trust, that people really don't believe companies care about them anymore. My father grew up in a time, not me, but my father grew up in a time of lifetime employment. You really had a shot at
Mhm.
spending your whole life at a company that cared about you. And there are still, Costco's about ready to potentially have a strike. Maybe they will, maybe they won't. But that's a company that's really done a pretty good job of building trust with its employees. And look at their stock price. Look at how well
Yeah.
that company's done. So, when people have a relative degree of trust, and then they feel like, maybe one could argue they're getting a little spoiled. People, when they feel like they're a cog in the wheel, when they have no meaning, people, I guess, want to have meaning in life now. And we're
Yeah.
spoiled perhaps. So I think there are a bunch of factors. But, and the funny thing is, I think America is, the funny thing, America is very angry. But I think, what they're forgetting is that they're really angry at is their bosses. They're angry at their companies. They're angry at the companies that sell them things that don't work, and where the customer service is bad. And
Yeah.
even the greatest president of all time won't solve that. It's really business that has to solve it.
Yeah, it has to start inside out. I mean, and
Yep.
I reside in Park City, but
Paradise.
I don't know if you kept up with this, but during the holidays, the ski patrol and the workers went on strike. They've been working on this since April. Okay. They were now, I'm sure it's more than this, Bruce, but this was the headline. Okay. They were getting $21 an hour and they wanted $23 an hour. And they agreed to about 20 different items. And these were the two thing, or this was the one thing. There was another one, and I don't know what it was, but there was this was lingering out there. And I remember even back in October, I saw the ski patrol picketing, and they made their voice known. They came back in December, and then right before the holiday, they went on strike. And these poor people who spent thousands and thousands of dollars they couldn't open up. They had 20% of the runs open because for the safety of the skiers, they couldn't open up the other runs because they didn't have any staff to patrol it.
Yeah.
So it was a huge thing, but it came down to, and Vail Resorts is obviously the one who owns that. They since got it worked out a couple weeks ago, and then at first I heard that they weren't going to give the people who were taking their vacations any credit back. They filed a class action lawsuit. Now they're going to give them some credits back. I mean, there's just a whole mess. But you're talking about something that was going on from April. They could have handled that, right? And you look, those are probably the examples of the extreme. But on a smaller level, it starts inside out, right? I mean, you have to, you have to build that culture and really make sure that your employees understand that they are a valuable piece of this working. And I agree, things move fast, and I don't see it enough. I don't see it enough.
Well, you know what it is? Here's what's interesting. This isn't, being nice guys. This isn't about being corporate social responsibility. It has nothing to do with that. It has to do with better business. Better business. Did it make sense economically to have that strike? Did it? If it did it, now think about the auto plant. Just think about the big strike we recently had in the automotive industry.
Yeah.
Do you know that I think it's estimated, and don't hold me to the exact numbers,
Sure.
but they're big. Something, an enormous amount of money was, 5, 7, $8 billion was lost due to that strike. And of course, the employees, you think they're really excited. You think they're, wow, I love management
Yeah,
now.
we're doing that. Yeah.
Meanwhile, a year before, and I'm a shareholder, I want to get a return on my stocks, on my, my pension, my IRA. I want to get a return, right? Well, guess what? They had done like a $20 billion stock buyback. Now, a stock buyback there's research that shows that, if you lessen the number of stock, shares, in play, you're going to get an increase. But is that create value creation? Is that
Yeah.
creating value? Right? So maybe if they invested in their workers, and by the way, you don't just give people pay increases. This is another thing. When you run a company this way, where you're reactive and you're not, like you're saying, planning ahead, you build productivity enhancements into your pay. For
Yeah.
instance, you create gain sharing so that if the employees improve performance, they get a share of that. There's so many things you can do if you work with your employees and show them the numbers, make them part of the decision. You'll get a lot more bottom line results. This isn't about being a nice guy.
Yeah, it's interesting you say that because there was a company I did some consulting work for, and they had a really interesting thing called an ESOP. Have you ever heard of that?
Yep,
Where
employee ownership, and there's a
yes,
big push for that.
yeah,
In fact, KKR, this is really interesting,
uh-huh.
and I didn't mean to cut you off, but you
No,
just touched
go
on
ahead,
something.
please. Yeah.
KKR is one of the leading private equity companies out there.
Okay.
Private equity, the so-called
Yeah.
bad guys, the guys who squeeze value and then sell what's left of it to somebody else.
Gordon
Well,
Gekko.
KKR has a different view. When they buy a company, they have a group where they sell a portion of the company to the employees. And they tell the employees, look, in 8 years, this is going to get sold again. And, we're going to try to find a good buyer, but there's never a guarantee. But the employees know that in 8 years, if it succeeds, they're going to get a nice payout. And in fact, 60 Minutes did a piece on it, and you can check it out. KKR, there's a Peter
Okay.
Stavros, I think is the man who's headed this up. So
Yeah.
ESOPs, and by the way, they're a very smart thing. I'm not giving tax advice, but
Yeah.
they make a lot of
Yeah.
sense for a certain size company. And I worked for an ESOP, and that's what got
Yeah.
me onto this whole thing of people management.
Yeah, it's employee stock ownership plan, and I don't know the whole guts of the thing, but I thought it was really interesting. I got a 10,000-foot view of what that plan looked like. But yeah, they had some real buy-in. So they would they would sell part of the company back to the owner, and then part of that acquisition would be giving the ownership to the employees themselves. And wow, I mean, what a great way to motivate your employees and really give them that ownership feel, because essentially they really do have it.
They do have it, and I worked for an employee-owned company, and it was as close to paradise as I've ever experienced. Now, it's not perfect, and different. Some employee-owned companies, their cultures actually become very smug. You would think it'd be otherwise, and they're so happy they become kind of proud. No joke, I've run into
Yeah.
that. But the bottom line is that that's one way. You don't have to do that to create employee engagement, employee involvement. You have to have a CEO who cares. So they're different. Once the CEO cares, there's a lot you can do that doesn't involve ESOPs.
Yeah, it makes it a lot easier. I'll tell you that. Leadership and culture. Okay, it's big. You've worked with organizations. You obviously have a lot of experience in the space. Where have you seen the best? You don't have to get specific, but maybe some of the elements of where you've seen some of the best culture and leadership, and what are some examples of that? If someone's listening out there who's running a business, and I don't care big or small, who's a CEO, or if they're running a 5-employee business, talk to me about where you've seen some of the best leadership and culture.
Well, I'm going to do that with one caveat. No company is perfect. Okay.
Yeah.
Every company, and if a company has 5 or 10 or 20,000 employees, they're going to be people that are not happy. Okay.
Yeah.
So we're just talking about on a relative scale.
Yes. Relative scale. Very good.
Where you can do a checklist, and there's a checklist you can do about the way companies treat people, and you can put them on a scale. So it's easy to mention local companies in each region. They're like, I'll bet you in Park City, there's a company that's just like this, a local retailer, a wine shop, maybe a place, a ski store, where the minute you walk in, there's an employee that comes right up to you, and she knows, and they immediately starts asking you, David, the right questions to help you. What are you looking for? And instead of trying to sell you, she helps you. She explains things. And in fact, she might even say, I wouldn't buy that. I wouldn't, based on what you're telling me, blah, 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 blah. So how do you do that in a company? So you really see it the most in grocery store chains, ironically. So on the East Coast, we have Wegmans, which is a great example. Wegmans is such a wonderful store. The jaded New Yorkers, okay, when a Wegmans opens up, there are lines. Another great company, Chick-fil-A. Everything's relative, and I know they've gotten into
Yes.
hot water. Now, by
Yeah.
the way, they got into hot water for some of their values related to, or statements that the owner had made related to gay rights. Well, funny thing, when they opened up their first store, I believe in New York City on 6th Avenue, there were lines out the door, and last I heard, it's the most profitable and biggest store for Chick-fil-A. So
Really?
whatever New Yorkers might feel about our love and respect for people of diverse everythings, that didn't stop anybody from racing in. So that's a national company. I think a long-term example has been Delta and Southwest Airlines. They've had their problems. Southwest, I think, has lost some of their soul. But
Yep.
Herb Kelleher was a great example of that. And look how the employees were, right? And that poor woman in Alaska that got fired for doing a twerk. Yeah, I thought they made a mistake. I wasn't familiar with that name of that dance, but to fire somebody over that when it showed that the woman was happy. Anyway, but Alaska is actually usually supposed to be a pretty good company this way. So you feel it when you walk. Piggly Wiggly, I don't know, Pixie, I think it is another.
Pig-
I'm trying to think of a store
Yeah.
chain outside in your
Yeah.
area. It is not Albertsons and it's not Safeway. No.
No.
But anyway, I'm trying to think of some other companies. But
Even even
Microsoft.
Home
Sorry.
Depot's gone downhill. I
Well,
remember.
the owner, the original guy, Langone,
Yeah.
was very, very much into people management. I think Ken Langone, but I'm not sure that the current management has lived up to that, and neither has Lowe's. I think they
Yeah.
too have
Yeah.
slipped. And Container Store is another example of a great company. Oh, here's another one that you might know: Texas Roadhouse.
Yes. Yeah.
They,
Know it.
they didn't lay off one employee during COVID. Nope.
Really.
And so when COVID ended, and in Texas, it ended, they opened up stores around Father's Day, I think in 2021. I forget the exact year. Texas Roadhouse had the biggest day of all time because all their employees were ready to go. So when the stores opened up, none of the other restaurants could open. They didn't have any employees. Texas Roadhouse, another great company, WD-40. I don't know how it is now, but when it was run by
Yeah.
Terry Ridge, the company had a NVIDIA-like stock increase, by the way. No one would know that. WD-40, that little blue can.
I remember. Yeah. I still have. I have
You
them
look at their
downstairs.
stock.
Yeah.
Yeah. Look at their stock when Gary Ridge joined, and I don't own any stock, and Gary's not a friend of mine. I know him, but we're not friends. You look at the stock from when he started and when he retired, it is almost like NVIDIA. And he is he wouldn't call himself what we call now stakeholder capitalist because that word got screwed up by politics. But it's people who believe you're going to make money by creating value rather than extracting value.
Yes.
Extracting value is misleading people, underpaying them, manipulating them, treating them like commodities. Creating value is looking for ways to make things better for everybody.
It's so true. We need to clip that back because what you just said there is going to be such a great highlight. And if you're listening, just listen back to that because that was such a great point when it comes down to it. I mean, realistically, you talked about, and I'm not, don't quote me on this, but it was almost like a checklist or a health checklist of an organization. And talk to me more about that. So if I'm a CEO, if I'm a business owner, it can work two ways, right? I mean, it can work for somebody looking to work for an organization or who is involved in an organization, or it could be somebody leading an organization. What are some of the elements in this checklist that stick out that I guess that you're checking the box?
Well, funny, we have on our website a free confidential maturity checklist that a company can do that one of our partners provides. So, but and you can actually go in and subjectively rate your company. And so basically, let's start with the logical.
Where can they find that? Because I'm going to have them pop that up right here.
Okay.
Do you know
they
exactly?
Can find that at theeea.org.
Yeah.
And then they click on there's services and tools. Okay.
Okay. Great.
I wish I could send you the link right now.
No, it's fine. But we'll pop it up here. Yeah, we'll
tools.
pop it up. Okay.
But essentially, number one, and every CEO should really sit down and ask herself, because she can do her own rating. Anybody who's introspective and honest can go, okay, so number one, does our organization have a clear purpose goals and objectives that the average employee could pretty much rattle off. Yeah, our company, we're in business to ensure that America's trucking industry has the minimum amount of downtime because of ball bearing problems or whatever. It can be
Right,
that,
right.
get
Yeah.
that arcane. And then a great company brings that to life for employees. Do they understand what it means to not have the ball bearings screw up or whatever, right? And then what are our goals and objectives for the year? What are we focusing on for the year? What did the average employee know? And then would the average employee know how their job rolls up into those goals and objectives? With the average, and I'll tell you, a lot of companies fail right away at that point. Okay. But if employees don't know what the purpose, goals, and objectives of the company, how can they work to support them? Right?
Yes.
Look, you're getting back to that alignment, a sports analogy, right? Or
Yes.
I hate to use it, but the war analogy. Every battle that's lost is usually due to lack of coordination, and every basketball game is often lost, or hockey game is lost due to a lack of coordination. So then, number two, do we have an operating system? And this gets back to how do you inculcate a culture of purpose. Remember, I don't care. It's fun to have, each company can have their own culture. Each office can
Yeah.
have its own culture, right? But a strategic culture is your values, right? What are your values? For instance, obviously, whatever was going on at what was Capital One recently just got a great big fine for
Mhm.
manipulating people. I doubt the CEO of Capital One was in on that. I doubt
Yeah.
it,
Yeah.
right? Likewise, who else just got? American Express just had to pay some enormous amount of money for deceiving customers.
Yeah. They were
That's not a very
charging.
nice
Yeah. There
thing.
was a fee or something like that. I mean, that's the leaders within. Yeah. Allowing that.
So I doubt the CEO knew about that. And they have all the posters on the walls about values, right?
Yeah.
So, but again, do you have really a business operating system really helps bake culture and bake everything into what you're doing? And what a business operating system, people may have heard of something called the Rockefeller system. There's something called Pinnacle. There's EOS that got
Yeah. EOS.
and
Yeah.
these are all, but frankly, you don't need to buy. And we actually have it in our chapter in one of our books, how to do it yourself. It really
Yeah.
is very simple.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
you can use these kits. You have all these different terminologies, and you can buy all the accessories and kits and software programs if you want. But they're usually not. I won't say it's not necessary. It can be helpful.
Yeah.
Bottom line is you have a system, and what does
Yeah, I
that
want to
mean?
I want to speak to that a second because it's funny. I
Please.
consult for two different companies, and I'm going to jump in here. And one uses an EOS system, and the other one uses more of their own homegrown. I would call it a business operating system, right? Like you're saying here. And I will say the homegrown one seemed a little bit more productive than the EOS with the terms and I'm not taking anything. EOS is it is a great framework to really stay productive. But I just wanted to speak to that point. You can create your own process within your organization, but there's got to be checks and balances. So I didn't mean to cut you off, but I just want to
Well,
tell you from
no, no, thank
experience.
you. Because
Yeah.
the key is this: it's like anything else. If you're not doing it authentically, you're wasting your time.
Yeah.
And if you're doing it authentically, you can usually develop your own system. But what are the key elements? There has to be, at the beginning of the year, there's a planning meeting. And if it's a smart planning meeting, it has input from all stakeholders and customers and employees and supply chain and distribution partners. Anybody who touches your organization and communities should be
Yeah.
part of the preparation for that. Because what's the purpose of the annual meeting? It's to make sure our purpose, goals, and objectives are up to date, right? And so we take
Yes.
everything we learned from the previous year and get together, and usually in an offsite, and then you develop a business plan, right? And it should be pretty short. And then every operating group has its own business plan and its own OKRs or object. I don't want to get into too much, terminology here,
Acronyms.
but
Yeah.
it's very important. KPIs, metrics. It's what a lot of companies do is they measure the activities, but they don't measure the impact. That's the
Yeah.
number one thing I see.
We're going to get sales
Um,
because we're going to talk about that for a minute
yeah,
too. I want
and
to
in
make sure we
sales,
touch on
the
that.
other
Yes.
problem is you only measure We only measure the result. And we don't measure what got us to it, which is what you
Yes,
really need to know.
yes,
But
yes,
anyway, we can get to that in a second. But wrapping
yes.
up, a business operating system establishes purpose, goals, and objectives. And so there's a results goal, what happened, and then there are the things that if we do more of will get us to the result. So did that happen? And then every operating group has their own. And then every week or month, every company develops, and certainly quarter develops their own cadence. Everybody gets back together, usually on a Zoom today. It could be an offsite or whatever, where
Yeah.
we all share what's going on and how is everything rolling up. And then you can reduce a lot of politics in an organization when you have a steady cycle. We always know we're having this meeting, so that if all of a sudden there's a little uproar in the logistics department and Jane and Bill are having a great big fight, unless it's an emergency, we table that. Jane, Bill, you're going to have to wait. We'll get to that, because otherwise everything just becomes I was going to say
Reactive.
something naughty in New York, a shoot show,
Yeah.
right? So the point is that having a system with meaningful metrics that include both the results and the things that you were doing to get to the results, and then finally very clear values. And then, of course, you have to make sure that your communications rolls up into this, that your rewards and recognition programs, you have incentives, and everything has to roll up to so that your interests are harmonized toward a common purpose, goals, and objectives. And when you do that, you don't eliminate trade-offs in business. You don't, but at least you can explain them, right?
Yeah,
So we
yeah.
had to lay off a bunch of people. And frankly, if you run your company right, I think you can avoid layoffs. And I, even running small companies, only once did I have to do layoffs. And even then, I was able to sell the company and avoid laying off people by doing that. But the point is that if you hire properly, and that's another story, I think a lot of companies could reduce layoffs. But in any case, when you have a clear purpose, goals, and objectives, you can explain trade-offs better.
Yeah, I want to revisit because I want to make sure that our listeners got this. One, you got to have a clear, and again, I'm sure there's more, but this is a real good foundation, a clear purpose, right? Goals and objectives, and then a business operating system really to measure those goals along with your values and really what's going to move the needle as an organization. And I think that is a fantastic start, because I probably say there's a lot of organizations out there who haven't thought of it this way, but that's it. It's a great recap.
Well, David, what's really ironic is that they haven't thought about it that way, but it's being done every day in factories all around the world,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
Japan, they've got a lot of problems in Japan, but they know how to create quality cars. And do you know there's not one, even though the US now uses total quality management in manufacturing, do you
Yeah.
know there's not one US car on the Consumer Reports list of the most reliable cars? Not
Are you
one,
kidding me?
not one,
Really?
not one. No,
Unbelievable. That tells
unbelievable.
you something. That tells you something. You touched on something here, talent. Okay. These days, there's a lot of resources to recruit talents. There's recruiters. What is the best way to retain, outside of compensation, which is, a big part of it, obviously, but to retain or attain the best talent out there and evaluate that for your organization?
Well, there's an enormous opportunity out now for companies. It's a great, because there's never been a bigger schism between two different types of cultures today, and I'm
Okay.
going to really summarize it by one:
Yeah.
return to work. And I think any company, and I fear for our federal government, I'm very supportive of our new administration to do the best things for our country. So I'm not getting, we're nonpartisan and
Yeah.
we're always positive. Okay. But what happens when you force people to return to work? You don't lose the bad people. You keep them. You lose the good people. You lose
Mm-hmm.
the people that know everything. You lose the people who, if you really want to cut costs, they know how to do it. Right. So companies today that are going back to command and control are so ripe to pick off people. I'll give you a great
Mm-hmm.
example. A friend of mine is a senior engineer at Google.
Okay.
And he's a huge company, so I'm not jeopardizing him. There's thousands of people like him.
Yeah.
He
Of course.
gets paid all the money on you could ever imagine. He gets all these perks. He gets all these wonderful things. They've cut back a little, but they're plenty good. He even likes his boss.
Okay.
He wants to leave. And you know why? There's
Why?
no meaning. There's no meaning to him. And well, I know somebody else, a young engineer at a terrific company called ASML. They're a Dutch company that makes the world's most sophisticated chip making machine. It's called the biggest company no one has ever heard of. And like
Okay.
NVIDIA, their stock has done very well over time. But anyway, they love their employees. They take care of their employees. This guy I know gets multiple job offers. He's a senior robotics engineer. I mean, robotics, he can go anywhere. He has
No
no
purpose.
plan. And you know what? He could earn more money tomorrow. So I think the components are, first off, different people. Let's talk about talent, okay?
Yeah.
Because you remember that there's a bunch of employees that are just trying to get by. They've given up. They're burnt out.
Mhm.
And I think anybody can be motivated. Anybody, just about anybody. I'm talking about people that are motivated, right? They're going to look for opportunities. And so if you want to get
Yes.
them, you give them, first off, they feel appreciated. It's so ironic, but this research tied to stock prices shows that one of the most critical components is that people feel genuinely appreciated. And you can't fake that, right, David?
No, you can't.
You know if I appreciate you. You know if your boss appreciates you, right? So they feel appreciated. They feel a sense of mission. They feel a sense of purpose. They feel they have a voice. They can speak up. They feel if they have a problem, the company is at their back. Yeah, they're adequately paid, but maybe they have opportunities to earn more. They have opportunities for gain sharing, stock options. So it, everybody's different, but I can tell you one of the most critical things is they feel appreciated, valued, and listened to. And that's at every level. That's from the janitor all the way on up. And the great stories about how important janitors are to
Yeah.
companies. And I've in the air freight business, let me tell you, the man or woman who's in the air freight warehouse or whatever, and she's making sure there's no dirt in the grooves that the dollies roll on or whatever. That is a mission critical job, and she knows it,
Yes.
and she's proud. So
Yeah.
pride is another element.
Right. It's great. And obviously, in this example you were talking about here, I mean, you've got to have pride and purpose because that's going to drive the motivation anyway. So I think as long as you understand that you're making a difference and that's recognized, that's a big part of it. And in growing organizations myself, one of the things I want to touch on is, with my teams, I always let them have the leeway to the flexibility to make some decisions. Now,
Yep.
if they weren't sure, I wanted them to come to their manager or have their managers come to me. But I really wanted our teams to be able to make decisions. And if they failed, it was okay. I let them know. Listen, there were some expensive mistakes that happened in my organizations. But one, it never happened again. And two, I had their back to always say, it's okay, it's fine. I appreciate you taking the opportunity and the chance. And if something went wrong because there was no cadence, well, that's a different story. But ultimately, we wanted to fail fast. And if we did fail or we had a mistake, it was okay as long as they were being aggressive or taking, a thought process to that decision. And if it didn't work out, and I think that's another thing is you got to build that T word, which is trust.
And David, the real problem that we have, and because I've been at this actually advocating for this type of management as a job since 1989, and I haven't seen that much progress. I hate to say,
Yeah,
and I
yeah.
and you know why, and I know why,
Why?
because it's not on the balance sheets or on the P&L of
Yeah,
companies. They
yeah.
can't, and I saw it during total quality management. Do you know that company, and they still do, but this was really prevalent during the 80s and 90s when I was covering it, for business publication. Companies just piled up defects behind the factory. They didn't. Oh well, we're going to build it. You know what? They're 8% defects. Don't worry. Just pile them up in the back. We build it into the pricing, right? So then the Japanese come along and they say, we don't want any defects, zero defects. We're going to have that car 100%. Well, all of a sudden, those defects they appeared on the balance sheet suddenly.
Yeah.
Okay. But they didn't appear until competition forced it. So our accounting system and the accounting profession is aware of this. And there's a lot of discussion among the accounting profession because companies are driving with one eye on the wheel. Look at like Enron, look at all the risks, Wells
Yeah, it
Fargo.
was.
But
Yeah.
those things happen all the time, right? And they don't get reported on. So if you're an investor in a company and you're wasting a ton of money, it doesn't show up on the balance sheet. And do you know that people don't show up on the balance sheet? Customers do in the form of sales. They're
The
an
sales
asset
numbers
in
do.
sales. But people, the only time they show up on the balance sheet, and I'm not an accountant, so if any of your listeners are CPAs, unless you buy a company, and then they're an asset and you account for them, right? We bought all these employees and there's an estimated value. But if you started up your company, there's nothing. So you could have massive turnover. You could have a very low employee referral rate. In other words, every employees are telling everybody, don't work for that company. You can have super high recruitment rates. You can have very low productivity rates. You can have very bad service, and your investors don't even know. And it's easy for the CEO to pretend it doesn't exist. So who was that guy? Some famous business consultant said, and he gets yelled at for it. That which gets measured gets done.
Yes.
Well, and again, he's been torn. I forget who he was, but he got torn apart a bit. Maybe it was Peter Drucker or something. But the point is that, they cannot see the waste. And if they saw it, I wonder, somebody should do a TV show where the CEO has a camera into the bedrooms. I don't mean from a sexual standpoint, of course, of every employee on a Sunday night or at the kitchen table, right? And or their little telemetry about how those employees feel. Or even, we haven't talked about customers, because guess what? When employees don't like a company, customers usually don't either.
Yeah, but I want to back up on this though too, because I think, and this recently happened in an organization I was doing work for. Sometimes the employees don't speak up and they let this stuff build up. Okay. And I've been on the other side of this too, because again, I've been a CEO, and there's a responsibility too on the employee side to be able to communicate. And whether it's out of fear or whether it's just not having the confidence to be able to bring this up. There was a company I work with where the CFO, and I use the quote unquote word CFO lightly here, but he'd been there for 14 years. Obviously, there was a lot of history, a lot of buildup, and he walked out. He was done. He quit. No notice, nothing. And it was very surprising to me, especially for somebody on an executive level like that, to be able to just do that. But a lot of the stuff that I see from the outside in was just things building up over years and years and years, and not having the confidence to really come and have a sit down conversation. Even the CEO is like, I wish we could have had a sit down conversation. So there is there's responsibility on both sides. But when I say, if you're an employee who's not happy with the culture, believe me, I think sometimes realistically what it comes down to is that, Bruce, like you said, the CEOs don't even know. They want to know, or the lead management. So there's got to be a better way to communicate. And with everything out there these days, I think that might be the solution, because I'm listening to this and go, man, wow, it sounds like communication to me when it comes down to it. But again, in the larger companies, it's much harder to have that voice,
I'll give
right?
you an example.
Yeah.
Back to ASML.
Yeah.
It's my understanding that every employee gets a check-in call.
Okay.
Every 30 or 40 days. And it's not human resources.
Okay.
The way this company appears to be, and this is off, not off the record I'm talking
right,
about, but
right. I know.
This is from what I have seen.
Yes.
The company is basically organized, or all the engineers at least report in to functional managers who kind of coordinate all of their activities, where they're going to be assigned. They might have to work on one element of the machine this week.
Right.
But this guy also, or lady, does something else too. He checks in on them. David, how's it going? Do you have any issues? And it's all confidential. Or do you have any ideas? Do you have any suggestions?
That's great.
And that person, the employee, knows that he or she can speak up and explain what's going on. And this individual is charged with solving the problem. Yeah. And this being a very big company, they have to comply with all sorts of regulations, right?
I'd love to dig into that and see how they do it.
All the
Yeah.
regulations, right? So this person obviously has to you can't solve every problem. Like if somebody has a disability that wasn't known, blah, blah,
Yeah.
blah, you have to handle it a certain way. So it's not perfect.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
never perfect.
Yeah. It's
But to
never
get to your
perfect, but
point, I think every employee should be getting a check-in from somebody who
I
has the
like that.
intelligence and the authority to do something with what they learn.
Yeah. I
And then
like that a
secondly,
lot.
every to voice, in the old days, every company used to have a suggestion box, right? Well, guess what? Every company should have an online suggestion box,
Yeah.
and it should be taken seriously, and it should be looked at and managed. Now, that's a whole nother story. In fact, every company should have a cost reduction system. Every company. In fact, that's
Yeah.
we wrote an article on what we would do to cut government spending. It would be a little different and probably less rigorous than what's going to happen. But if you want to cut costs, get the people involved who are involved with seeing the money spent.
Yeah. Good point. It's a really good point. Get the feedback from again, people leading the charge, get the feedback from them. I think it's
And you
things
even
move
share
so
the
fast.
gains.
Yeah.
Hey,
All
you
right.
came up
That's
with a way to save $4 million on that wasteful food processing system we were using. Okay, well, there's a gain sharing thing, and the employees that teamed up to do it get a share of the benefit.
yeah, that's good. In your book, uh, when you talk about some of the leaders, right, in the enterprise engagement for CEOs, but you give some examples of Gary Vaynerchuk, Jim McCann of 1-800-Flowers, and you talk about those businesses. What is the common thread that aligns those leaders, as a whole?
They don't need to be convinced of the value of it. Of having people engaged. They don't need to see the numbers. They have, and I don't. I'm not asking any CEO to have faith about this. No, that
Yeah,
this is business. But they actually know in their hearts that having people engaged is going to give them an edge. It's going to give
yeah,
them an edge in customer service because instead of being nonchalant and people don't care, they bounce, they jump. How can I help?
yeah,
You can tell it, by the way, if you've ever have to get your car repaired anymore. You can go. A shop is a great place to see the culture because you can tell right then. Are all the tools lined up carefully? Is everything clean? Everything organized? Are the guys and ladies, mostly guys still, are they at work? So in every organization, you can really walk in and see whether there's a buzz or whether there's silence.
yep. And believe me, the customers can pick it up really, really fast. They can pick it up fast.
It's so funny. I love to tell CEOs, guys, have you ever been a customer of your own company? Have you ever done a mystery shopper?
Undercover
Have you
boss.
ever called customer service of your company? Try it sometime. And if the CEO of Verizon, I know the CEO of Verizon isn't calling his customer service because it's horrendous.
Yeah, it's
And I
not
don't know how
good.
they get away with it, except that
Yeah,
it's a monopoly. It's either that or T-Mobile or whatever. I'm going to single them out. And Citibank is another company that, and they don't care about the customers when the minute you pick up, you're hearing the cock-a-doodle-doo of a rooster in Philippines in the background. No offense to the people of Philippines. They're
no, I
wonderful
agree with
people.
you. Yeah,
It's absurd. They're basically saying, we don't care about you, customer. And
it's
the irony is, if you're a big customer for these companies, like if you're a platinum, you don't end up in the Philippines or
no,
Mexico.
no.
You're speaking to a very charming, American accented person, So that the company's right there saying, this is what we think of you.
Yeah, yeah. Listen, there was more I wanted to get into, but I want to ask you a couple more questions before we go. And first off, how can someone get a hold of you? And if they want to talk more about this, I call it organizational alignment, human capital management. We're talking, we've used a lot of terms here,
Stakeholder
but
management. Well,
yes,
anyway, people can just email me very easily at my name, Bolger, as in if anybody remembers the scarecrow of the original Wizard of Oz, Bolger at the EEA.org, and EEA stands for Enterprise Engagement Alliance. So Bolger at the EEA.org. And our whole strategy is to pay it forward, which, by the way, is, I think, the best strategy in sales. So if we have 3 more minutes to talk about sales, we can talk about anything you want. But
Well,
Bolger at the EEA.org.
I want to talk about your strategy because we're going to touch on sales here because that was my last question, right? We both have alignment in your idea of helping. I'm a big proponent and believer of leading with challenges, speaking the language of organization or your prospect. You have a great idea, your approach is really permission-based market selling, right? How you can help people. Talk to me about that and elaborate here for any sales professional listening to this.
Well, and I can actually do it pretty quickly.
Take your
I've seen
time.
more
We're
money
not
wasted
rushed.
in my life.
Take your time, please.
Well,
Take your time.
David, I've seen more money wasted in marketing. I can imagine. I've had to tell customers, don't do that. The amount of money spent on what's called drayage at trade shows, people putting up these enormous booths when all you could basically just have a few tables and a couch. All these big splashy advertising campaigns that aren't in any way measured, that they really have no idea whether it worked. All these viral campaigns. No, the key in any business almost today, it was different before the internet. But today with the internet, anybody can become their own media. Any company can become their own media company, right?
Yeah.
And what does that mean? You identify people that you can help. And then you develop a strategy for proving to them that you can help them. And not waiting for, especially in B2B, but in almost any purchase, you never know when somebody's going to buy a grill.
Yeah.
You never know. Sure, more people buy grills in the spring, but they might be thinking about that grill right now. So how do you build a relationship with them so that when they are ready to buy, they think of you? So, and every company I know, I've never seen a company that does this successfully. Trek bicycles maybe is the closest I've ever seen and it's so inexpensive. In fact, I think the reason that marketers don't want to do it is first off, it's not in their skill set to identify and build relationships. They don't know how to inform people. They just want to sell, buy. No, inform, build a relationship, become a trusted advisor. And then I hate to say it, knuckleheads say, well, I don't open up any emails, so nobody else does. No, the email newsletters that we do for our clients have 40% open rates.
Yes.
Okay. And why? Because they're not filled with buy. I'm going to tell you right now, Maui Jim, if you're listening, you have the dumbest marketing campaign I've ever seen. And I hate to say it, but 1-800-Flowers is another example. I love them dearly, but they just spam every day.
Yeah.
No, you develop, how can I help you? What advice, what little tips can I give you that are useful, that are related to flowers? Hey, do people know that there are different types of flowers to give to different occasions? Do you know that 1-800-Flowers has never told me about that? Never. Right. So I get every day, it's just spam,
it's amazing,
spam.
Isn't it?
So inform, help, have fun, put a silly video, maybe, personalize your brand. Instead of having the CEO talk, having Jane in customer service talk. By the way, build relationships, and you know how powerful it can be. Carnival Cruise Lines, of course.
Oh yeah.
Well, many, many years ago, they had a concierge. I forget her name.
Okay.
I'm not a cruise guy, but I know this is true.
Okay.
And she became really popular. Everybody started calling her. She was the concierge. Well, guess what? They didn't have a non-compete clause with her. And one day, Jane decided to go work for a competitive cruise line. And of course, all these people came with her. So companies don't measure these things, right?
Yes.
So the idea is build, and after somebody buys, treat them really well. Don't subject people. And again, I have nothing against India. I love these countries, but it's very inconvenient for people when they don't understand what somebody's saying.
I agree.
Right?
I couldn't agree more.
And it's tiring.
frustrating.
It makes you not want to call.
Totally. It really does.
But so anyway, you know why this isn't sexy? So anyway, think about this. Think of one company you do business. Like I do, I fly on American a lot. All I get is spam. Never anything. about a useful anything except when they're letting you know that there's a warning about a hurricane coming, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So I think that and you know why that nobody does this is that it's not taught in marketing. It's not
Yeah.
taught in marketing. And a guy named Seth Godin, I think he's famous. He wrote the famous book, Permission Marketing. He's the bald guy. He came up with the
Yeah.
purple cow thing. I think he's one of the most successful, social media people. Permission Marketing. It's the Bible of marketing, and that's a double entendre because it's the greatest wisdom rarely followed.
I
You
agree
know,
with you. And it's funny,
so
in speaking to that, you were saying American Airlines. So I fly Delta a lot. I mean, that's who I fly. And they went through a real rough patch after that whole situation with the systems going down. And recently, though, I've noticed like what you're talking about, actually the opposite. Their marketing is more messaging of how we can help. Here's what we're offering. Here's how you can use this. This is it's someone's got it right now, at least an idea of how to start speaking to the customers again. Where earlier this year, first half of the year, maybe more, it was really bad. I mean, it was really, really bad on the travel side. It was bad on the customer service side. And it seems like they've recognized it and someone's in the driver's seat there trying to turn it around.
well, also I think they tinkered with their loyalty program and really pissed people
Yes.
as well.
Yep. Yeah,
You
they
know,
did. Yep. So anyway,
well,
but listen,
think about
yeah,
it.
it's
If
been
you're a
great.
marketing executive and you have a
Yep.
$25 million budget, are you going to want to set up a permission-based marketing program where you're funneling all of your leads into creating the Colgate publication in a sense, right? Or are you going to
Right.
want to be doing those advertising shots out on the beach in Malibu? I'm sorry right now
Right.
for our friends in Malibu, but
Yeah, I know what you mean.
Malibu will be back,
Yes,
but
it will.
as all of California will, but LA. But my point is that I don't know what human nature is, but because most marketing isn't measured, really, you can get away with murder. And
Yeah.
CMOs wonder why they're not getting the respect that they used to have.
Yeah.
That used to be a really top job. And from what I'm reading, a lot of people say they don't even really truly have a slot at the C-suite anymore. And I think anybody who can't really prove value creation is got a problem today. And
Well,
advertise a lot of it really. Remember what they used to say? I know half of my advertising works. I just don't know which half. Somebody said that 80 years ago. They said it was John Wanamaker. I don't know who said it, but the bottom line is it's still true.
it really is. And I always say this, understand where to put pressure. If things are going really, really well, put pressure on it. Keep doing it. If things are not going really, really well, fail fast, put pressure on it so it breaks. But that's the whole idea of marketing, is really understanding where to put pressure and what's working. Listen, there's no magic bullet. But if you got 5% here, 10% here, 11% here, 15% here, it's really identifying. And it's not as easy as it sounds. But when your job is to be the chief marketing officer, that should be your absolute focus. And also in the sales realm of it, the KPIs we talked about earlier, Bruce, is, again, where to put pressure. Listen, I don't care how many sales you got. What I want to know is how many touches you made. And when you made those touches, how many appointments did you get? And when you got those appointments, how many deals did you close? I mean, I'm excited about you closing the deals, but I want to know everything leading up to that point, right?
Voila.
Like where the pressure, again, where did you put pressure to start this thing? So actually, we could do another sales show. I know I'm going to come on your show. I'm really excited to do
We're doing one
that.
with you on sales, and I'll get back to you on that.
Yeah, I want to do that. And I'll tell you what, I think this has been extremely educational for our listeners. Anybody running an organization, it's obvious that you know your shit, and pardon my language, but you know your stuff. Okay. So I want people to reach out to you if they have questions. This is a guy you could have as a resource for you, for your organization, or just obviously you'll help. I know just in getting a sense of us communicating that you want to help. So I really appreciate you being on the show. This has been fantastic. And I want to bring you back on because we're going to talk sales. I want to talk sales on your show, and I'm going to bring you back on and talk sales on our show because I think we could probably do a whole nother hour on this.
Sales, there's just so much opportunity in sales. Absolutely. Love to. Thanks so much, David.
Yeah, appreciate it. Listen, everybody, wealth, health, success to all of you out there. checked out this show. Again, like this show, just share the show with one person. We are growing fast, and we really appreciate it because it's of you listeners out there and guests like Bruce. And Bruce, again, thanks for being here, and we'll see you next time, everybody.
Unfinished Business Podcast Show with your host, David Sliman.